So first of all, let's talk about cards. CardView is a new API that we put into the support library, so you can use this on Lollipop. You can also use it on previous releases. In Lollipop, it uses the capabilities that we built into the rendering engine to get real-time shadows. On previous releases, it bakes in those shadows. You get something that looks pretty good. It's not as nifty as the implementation on Lollipop, but we did what we could with what was available. It's also clipped on the borders, so we have rounded rectangles for the cards. And then there's that subtle elevation to give it the shadowed look. You would use capabilities like for cards in implementing the card. Actually, the card that I implemented for my demo, I just went ahead and wrote by hand. It's just a frame layout, and then I just shaped the view and gave it some elevation. So I was sort of mimicking what's going on in the CardView API in the support library, partly because CardViews, I think, hadn't come online by that time, but also because it shows some of the simple capabilities that we have for shaping and shadowing views. So here, there's actually a couple of different ways to implement cards with outlines. One of them is to set an outline. If you're in a custom view, you can set an outline on that custom view and then override on size changed, so that when the view changes size, you can resize the outline appropriately. So that's all we're doing here. We're saying giving a new outline and set it to be a round rect with the following dimensions and corner radius. And then set clip to outline tells us to actually shape the view to that outline. So it's actually going to clip to that simple shape, as well as to cast a shadow from that shape.
Yeah. And going through the outline API means that you cannot use an arbitrary shape as your outline. You're limited to rounded rects, so rectangles and circles.
And then for the shadow, you set an elevation and automatically casts a shadow according to whatever shape you've set on the outline. Alternatively, you can use something that was not in the preview API but is in the public release of Lollipop called an outline provider, or a view outline provider. In this case, it's sort of tedious. If you're not in a custom view, it's tedious to find out about size changes and then change the outline on the fly. Outline provider allows you to do that. You set an outline provider, and then your provider will be called whenever that view needs information about the outline. So the size is changed in the view, it knows that it needs a new outline, it's going to call your provider, and you're going to return back the appropriate information. So here, instead of overriding on size changed, we simply implement the get outline method in the view outline provider interface and return back an outline appropriate to the new size. And then we set the outline provider on the view, and then again we set clip to outline to shape the view. Or as I said before, you could just use CardView, a little bit easier. We talked about cards in previous talks today. Very simple. It's just a container that has views in it. The main reason to use CardView is that it gives you a consistent look and feel with other applications and system apps that are actually using cards. So everybody has a consistent elevation, a consistent corner radius, consistent padding for the items inside. Otherwise, it's fairly simple frame layout.
And it was possible to implement CardView on your own in the previous releases. And you can see here several ways of doing it. So you could use just a PNG background. It works pretty well for rounded rects. It's not going to work for a circle, obviously. You could also use path clipping, but it doesn't give you anti-aliased clipping. And it was only possible on API level 18. It was also pretty expensive for the GPU to do path clipping, so it's not really recommended. And the last one, I wrote a couple articles on that subject. You could simply use textured shapes, but that would require the content of your view to be in a bitmap, which means that your view has to be static or more static than you want. So if you really need to recreate that effect on previous versions of Android, it's possible. Just take a look at those 3 possible implementations, and depending on what you need, you'll find one that might work for you.
So let's talk about ripples. So this is the idea that you want to give the user information not only that state has changed in their views, but why the state changed. So show them the animation of the state change, that this button is now being pressed. Not only that, but where the button was pressed. So you give them feedback about the actual touch point on the view as well. There's ripple capabilities built into a lot of the standard widgets. So when you press on a button, we're going to show you ripple feedback for that button. If you have a custom view, you may want to use a ripple drawable so that you can get the same effect on your view. Also, there are capabilities that you can add to ripples to have different colors. We'll see some of these things in Romain's demo later on. So here's a simple example of this. I don't know if this comes across in the slide, but just sort of showing as I click on this view, you're seeing the touch feedback before we then actually launch into the separate sub-activity. So there's a couple of different ways to instantiate ripples in XML. You can say, here's my ripple drawable, and that is basically a wrapper around other drawables. So the ripple wraps this other drawable, and then provides the capability to then ripple and sort of reveal that other drawable over time. Or from code, you can instantiate a ripple drawable, and then you can set colors on that to sort of change some of the attributes of that ripple. You can also use this easy approach and just say that your view has a selectable item background, and that automatically feeds the ripple behavior into that view so that when someone presses on it, it knows that it's selectable, and that selectable behavior in the material theme will show a